Sorry about that. I got distracted by a phone call. So we have the Boston Massacre, 1773. Lord North, as a result of this, is really trying to avoid trouble. Hey, the Boston Massacres occurred. They repealed the town's duties except on tea. They're trying to hold on to it. 1773. What Lord North has essentially done is said we're not going to send any tea whatsoever. We're just going to avoid that, but we assert the right to be able to tax you if we ever did sell tea. Kind of a just holding pattern, hoping that if time goes by, eventually things will calm down. By 1773, Lord North has waited long enough. He sends tea off to North America. It has a tax on it, small tax, but a tax on it. It arrives in North America, and immediately the American radicals protest. In many of the colonies, where the tea shows up, it simply doesn't get unloaded. Some colonies, it gets unloaded, it stays on the docks, and the Americans protest by refusing to load it up and distribute it, and it just rots on the docks. But in Boston, they decide to do things different. In Boston, they decide what they're going to do is sneak onto the ships, dump all the tea into Boston Harbor, and this will be their sign of protest. They decide to take this further by dressing themselves up. A bunch of guys get dressed up as Native Americans. They jump on the ships. They throw everything overboard. And of course, we know this is the Boston Tea Party, 1774. The British response here, guys, is always key in the American Revolution, and sometimes people overlook it. I mean, if you look at it from objectively from a different perspective, especially the British perspective, you have to understand that up till the Boston Tea Party, the British government has been very, very patient in many ways. They've not really sent in the army, even though tax collectors have been attacked and the British government and people have been criticized. They haven't done anything so far. They've just kind of let things happen, hoping things would calm down. But the British response to the Boston Tea Party is very strong. They close down Boston. They send in a warship. They declare a curfew, martial law in Boston. And people often wonder and say, why do they act so strongly after all these other things, just as some tea being thrown in Boston Harbor? Well, there is an argument, a theory for this. Clearly, you're looking at what people wrote, and some people don't always make their ideas clear in the written word, especially when it comes to government. But nonetheless, later on, we're going to talk about a guy named Napoleon Bonaparte. And Napoleon Bonaparte, which once tried to insult Britain by calling it a nation of shopkeepers. Now, what he meant by that was that it was a nation of middle-class people. And it is. It may have this aristocracy and this royalty and this whole thing going on with the British upper classes, but it is essentially a middle-class nation. And in the 18th, 19th century, that middle class was growing. And anywhere in the world where you're going to have a middle class, you are going to have an effort to protect property. Wherever you see the middle class growing, you begin to see laws passed saying we need to protect property. What the British colonists did in Boston when they threw the tea over into Boston Harbor is they destroyed private property. And they destroyed property that was supposed to be sold on the open market. As a middle class type of society, that's not something you can really allow. The British government are going to respond strongly, and certainly one of the reasons is going to be because it's a precedent that they cannot allow. They can't allow this wanton destruction of private property. For the American radicals, this is exactly what they were waiting for. They now turn to the American public and colonists and say, see, hey, look what they're doing in Boston. They shut the town down. They've got a curfew. They don't allow public meetings. Hey, it's happening there now. If you don't do something, it's going to get worse. In September of 1774, we have the meeting of the First Continental Congress. Representatives from 13 colonies get together and they go to Philadelphia and to discuss what are they going to do in response to the British in Boston. Now, the British had shut down Boston. They had passed a law called the Coercive Acts. The Coercive Acts essentially been acts, also known as the Intolerable Acts. also known as the Intolerable Acts. These acts were the acts that shut down Boston. So the American colonists, representatives get together in Philadelphia in September 1774, and they say, what are we going to do about these coercive acts? What are we going to do about the British shutting down Boston? And they decide what they're going to do is they're going to complain. They're going to say, we're very angry. We are going to boycott British goods. But this is a Continental Congress that's angry, but they're not ready for revolution. And they made that very clear. We're going to boycott goods. We're going to write a list of complaints. We're going to send out to the British government, to the king, but we're not ready to break away. Now, you might think that this might depress the American radicals, people like Patrick Henry and others who are saying we need to fight for our independence, Sam Adams. But in fact, this just encouraged them. For them, what this meant was this is the next step towards war. War is coming. In 1775, radicals begin to prepare for this war. They begin to hide military equipment, contraband all over the colonies, hiding in barns, in fields, anywhere where they can get to it quickly, because when they believe when the war begins, they're going to have to fight. I told you before that when the American Revolution was over, 10% of the American colonists left the 13 colonies and went to Canada so they could live under British rule. My point being is that there was a large number of American colonists who were loyalists, who believed in the British government. So while the radicals are hiding all this military equipment, many of the loyalists are running to the British military and saying they're hiding military equipment in Farmer John's barn. Go get it. And the British in 1775 spend much of the time, especially in the early part of it, sending patrols out to these places and finding this contraband. In April of 1775, the British will send out 2 patrols to become major events in the American Revolution. April 1775, we have Lexington and Concord. The first one is Lexington, Massachusetts. The British sent out a patrol to find some illegal contraband. Some American colonists decide they're going to resist. As the British patrol reaches a bridge, across the bridge they can see a couple of these colonists who said that they were ready to fight in a minute. We call them Minutemen. According to the official British report, the British officer at the time in charge of the patrol looked across the bridge, saw a few colonists, decided this is not really worth my effort. There's not many there. He had just been promoted. The British did investigate this. And the officer said, he admitted, I waited to see if more guys would show up, see if this was going to be worth a fight. Eventually, some other colonists showed up, the 5'10" men. It's a joke. Some later guys showed up. And when they thought there was enough, the British officer led his men across the bridge. They fired on each other. The colonists were dispersed. The British went on to patrol. In the same month, in a place called Concord, same state colony in Massachusetts, another British patrol went out. This patrol went out, found the equipment, found the military contraband, started dragging it back when they were ambushed by American colonists. Lexington and Concord, what we call the shots heard round the world in American history. That phrase, by the way, is used in lots of places in world history, shots heard round the world. But in any case, why was it so important? Very difficult to explain to an audience in 2020 or in the 21st century. We have become so numbed to violence. We go on YouTube, we can see beheadings and all kinds of cases, murders. We go see movies of torture and murder for entertainment. In 1775, the idea that American and British soldiers and colonists fought and died at Concord, they died on both sides. This shocked Americans, and it shocked the American leaders. The result was in September of 1775, the Second Continental Congress will meet. Pretty much the same members that were in the First Continental Congress. The only difference is Lexington and Concord have radicalized. I'm going to see if I can get rid of that shadow. They have radicalized the American colonists. How's that? Anybody get seasick yet? Hey. Ooh, that'll work. Hey. They have radicalized the American colonists. Hey. When they get together in 1775, even though it's pretty much the same people that were at the First Continental Congress, these people are angry. And these people are ready to break away. And they make that very clear. They declare that we are meeting in order to create an independent nation. They turn to Thomas Jefferson, young representative from Virginia, and they say, write our Declaration of Independence. And that's exactly what he does. He writes the Declaration of Independence. Yes, much of it is plagiarized from John Locke, but nonetheless, we celebrate the signing of the Declaration of Independence on the on the 4th of July, 1776. In fact, it wasn't really signed by everybody until August, but nonetheless, we declared our independence. 7 years later, we will win that independence, and America will create its own nation, United States of America. Is this a revolution? Were these people fighting for their independence? Or was it a rebellion? Some people like to jokingly say it was just a bunch of white guys who didn't want to pay their taxes. If it's a conservative movement to fight the change, maintain the status quo, that says a great deal about American history. We don't like change. We get uncomfortable with it. We go a little crazy sometimes, and we have the 60s or the 90s, and we have some change, but it's not something we're comfortable with. Maybe that's true. In any case, guys, we're looking at causes and events leading up to the American Revolution. Hopefully that covers it. Don't forget your reading and follow your notes. Let me know how things are going. Bye-bye.